She does not text first very often. She does not flood you with attention or go out of her way to make her feelings readable. If anything, the word most men would reach for when describing her behavior is distant. Maybe reserved, maybe even a little cold. And because of that, the conclusion most men land on is that there is simply nothing happening beneath the surface. That conclusion feels reasonable. It feels logical. But it may be exactly where things go wrong. The assumption most men carry is that attraction should be easy to identify. If a woman is interested, she should make herself available. If she is thinking about you, some obvious signal should surface. What this assumption misses is how unpredictably emotions actually behave once they become real. Sometimes they pull a person closer. Sometimes they make a person go quiet. Sometimes, the more someone feels, the more carefully they move. The mistake of reading distance as disinterest has caused countless men to walk away from something that was genuinely there, simply because it did not look the way they expected it to. Some women become more cautious precisely because they care more than they are comfortable admitting. When a person feels nothing, they can be relaxed. The outcome does not carry weight, so the words do not need to be measured. But a woman who genuinely likes someone becomes acutely aware of every interaction. She starts monitoring how she comes across. She begins wondering whether she is revealing too much. Ironically, all of that internal activity makes her appear less engaged on the outside, while her inner world is becoming increasingly occupied with thoughts of you. This is why the most meaningful signals are often the quietest ones. They do not announce themselves. They surface in small moments, a glance that vanishes the second you notice it, a detail she recalls weeks after you mentioned it, a message that arrives without any obvious reason. None of these seem significant alone. Together, they form a picture most men never see because they are scanning for something obvious, while the real story is written in the subtle. The first signal is where her attention goes when she believes nobody is watching. When someone becomes emotionally interesting to us, our curiosity accelerates before our confidence does. We want to understand them more. We observe them. We pay attention without necessarily wanting them to know we are doing it. So, she looks across the room and her eyes find you. The moment yours meet hers, she looks away immediately. Most men dismiss this as coincidence. They tell themselves she was simply looking in that general direction, and once or twice, that might be true. But when it becomes a pattern, something else is operating beneath the surface. People naturally monitor what captures their thoughts. When a woman is thinking about someone more than she lets on, her attention gravitates toward him, even without conscious intention. This extends beyond physical spaces. She views your posts quickly. She seems to know what you have been doing, even though you have not spoken in days. She reacts to something most people scrolled past entirely. She occasionally reveals that she has been paying closer attention than she intended, not through investigation, but because her curiosity keeps bringing her back. Attention is one of the clearest indicators of emotional investment, because it is one of the hardest things to fake. Words can be controlled, feelings can be concealed, but where a person's attention drifts when no one is watching is very difficult to manufacture. A woman who feels nothing does not spend her energy observing you. She is occupied with her own life and her own concerns. When someone repeatedly finds herself returning her attention to you, it tends to signal an emotional interest she has not yet fully expressed. The second signal is that she remembers things most people would have forgotten entirely. Memory and attention are deeply connected. The brain places greater value on people who occupy our thoughts, which means it retains information about them more carefully. A woman who seems entirely casual on the surface can suddenly surface a detail 2 weeks later that you had completely forgotten you shared. You mentioned a presentation you were nervous about. She asks how it went long after you stopped thinking about it. You described a restaurant you wanted to try once in passing. A month later, she brings it up as though the conversation happened yesterday. You told a story that briefly mentioned your brother's name. She remembers it. Most men write this off as a good memory, but there is a meaningful difference between someone who retains information and someone who retains you. When a woman thinks about someone regularly, the conversations do not simply end when the interaction does. They linger. She replays them. The things you said become attached to a person she finds emotionally compelling, which makes them easier for her mind to hold. Think about the dozens of conversations you yourself have had over the past month that left no trace. Names fade, stories dissolve, the brain filters constantly. But when someone begins to matter, that filter shifts. Details that should have been forgotten stick instead. She may not even realize she is doing it. Nobody consciously decides to memorize someone. The attention gives the information value, and the brain quietly stores it. Then, weeks later, she mentions something you had completely forgotten telling her, and something in you begins to recalibrate. The third signal involves the people closest to her, and it is one of the most reliable because it reveals what happens when you are not around. A woman can manage her behavior around you. She can appear casual. She can maintain composure. What becomes much harder to control is what she does when she is talking to the people she trusts. Human beings process emotions through conversation. They talk through confusion, through excitement, through the early, disorienting stages of attraction. When a woman starts thinking about someone regularly, there is a strong chance her closest friends hear his name long before he realizes it. You might notice this when you walk into a gathering and one of her friends recognizes you immediately despite having never been introduced. There might be a quick exchange of glances between them. Someone might smile differently when you approach or say something that carries a strange familiarity, as though they have already heard pieces of your story. You tell yourself you are imagining it, but the pattern continues. Her friends seem to know more about you than the degree of contact between you would explain. This happens because attraction creates conversation. A woman lying awake replaying an interaction, trying to understand why a particular moment stayed in her mind, wondering whether you are interested, confused by her own feelings, does what most people do. She talks to someone she trusts. She shares details. She asks questions. Before long, the people around her know your name, know fragments of your story, and know considerably more about the situation than you would ever guess. When a friend accidentally reveals that knowledge through a comment that comes too close, through a reaction that makes no sense unless they have already heard about you, it is worth paying attention. People do not invest significant conversational energy in someone who holds no emotional significance. The fourth signal is the one that confuses men most often, and it causes many of them to walk away from something real. She reaches out unexpectedly. The conversation flows easily. There is genuine connection. And then she disappears again. Days pass, sometimes longer. The same woman who seemed eager to talk goes quiet. Most men immediately assume they did something wrong. They replay every message. They look for the moment things shifted. They conclude that her silence means she lost interest. But that interpretation misses something important about how attraction actually works. A woman who feels nothing has very little to process. A woman who feels a real emotional pull has considerably more to navigate internally. She starts wondering where things are heading. She questions her own feelings. She becomes aware of possibilities that did not exist before. And for some women, that awareness creates an instinctive withdrawal. They move closer because they want connection, then pull back because the connection suddenly feels real. and the vulnerability that comes with it becomes uncomfortable. She had been thinking about you throughout the week. Something reminded her of a conversation you had. Curiosity finally won out, and she reached out. The interaction was good, but now the emotional reality of what she feels is more present than it was before, and that presence can be unsettling. So she creates distance again to manage it. A woman who disappears repeatedly and then reappears is very different from a woman who simply disappears. One pattern suggests she has moved on. The other suggests she is still emotionally engaged, but working through something internally. The fifth signal is that she behaves differently around you than she does around everyone else. This is consistently overlooked because most men are looking for words rather than behavior. They want an explicit signal, a clear declaration, something that removes uncertainty. What they tend to miss is that emotions reveal themselves through behavioral changes long before they find their way into direct communication. When someone holds no emotional investment in you, they act around you roughly the same way they act around everyone else. There is no particular shift in energy. But when someone starts caring, that consistency begins to change in ways they often fully control. She might become quieter around you, even though she is naturally outgoing with everyone else. This confuses many men because they expect attraction to produce expressiveness. But sometimes the one person whose opinion matters most is the person who makes someone more self-conscious, more careful, more aware of being perceived. Alternatively, she might become unusually energetic, laughing more readily, more engaged than her baseline. The specific direction matters less than the fact that something shifts. The version of her that shows up around you is not quite the same version everyone else encounters. That inconsistency is itself the signal. Watch how she moves through a group setting with other people. Then compare that to how she is with you. The difference in eye contact, in what she remembers, in how present she seems, often tells a story that nothing she has said aloud has come close to matching. These are not planned behaviors. They are emotional reactions, and that is precisely what makes them so revealing. The sixth signal is that she tests you. Most men hear that word and immediately think of manipulation or game playing. But that framing misses what is actually happening. She already has a reasonable sense of whether you are interested in her. What she does not yet know is whether you are the same person under pressure that you appear to be when everything is easy. If she has been paying attention to you, remembering details, talking about you with people she trusts, thinking about you more than she has shown, then the stakes for her have risen. She is no longer observing a stranger. She is evaluating someone who could actually matter to her. And when that happens, people naturally become more careful. They want some assurance that their feelings are being placed somewhere worth placing them. So, she mentions another man and watches your response. She disagrees with you on something small. She takes a little longer to reply than usual. She changes a plan and pays attention to how you handle it. These moments deliver information. She is observing whether you become anxious, controlling, reactive, or needy. She is checking whether the steadiness she has been drawn to holds up when circumstances are less comfortable. The mistake is treating these moments as threats. Men who react by going cold, becoming demanding, or suddenly requiring explanations reveal exactly the fragility she was quietly hoping was not there. If she genuinely did not care about where things were heading, she would have no reason to evaluate you at all. The fact that she is paying attention to your reactions often means your position in her mind has become more significant, not less. The seventh and final signal is the one that ties everything together. She keeps finding reasons to bring herself back into your world. A message that references something you once said. A question she could have easily answered elsewhere. A comment on something you posted when she rarely engages with anyone else's content. The message itself is often not the point. What matters is that she thought of you and acted on it rather than letting the impulse pass. She could have kept scrolling. She could have moved through her day without reaching out. She chose not to. That choice, repeated across weeks and months, is one of the clearest distinctions between genuine interest and ordinary politeness. Politeness responds when it has to. Interest creates its own occasions. The important thing to understand once you begin recognizing these patterns is what to do with them. Many men make their biggest error right here. The moment they sense something is moving in a direction they hoped for, they become impatient. They want certainty immediately. They start applying pressure, demanding clarity, acting differently because they need the ambiguity to end. And that pressure is often precisely what unravels what was building. Attraction does not grow well under urgency. The more meaningful a connection becomes, the more carefully people tend to move through it. A woman who has spent weeks quietly thinking about you, trying to understand her own feelings, navigating her own vulnerability, does not want to be rushed into a declaration before she is ready. What tends to open people up is not pressure, but safety. When she feels safe, she becomes more willing to be seen. When she feels rushed, she protects herself again. Patience is not passivity. It is the evidence that your emotional equilibrium does not depend on resolving every uncertainty immediately. Pay attention to her actions more than her words. Stay present. Let her see that your stability is not conditional on every response she gives you. People are naturally drawn towards someone whose inner state does not swing with every shift in the interaction. That kind of groundedness is genuinely rare, and it creates the conditions under which real connection becomes possible. Attraction rarely looks the way most people expect it to. It does not usually arrive in grand gestures or clear declarations. It moves through small, repeated moments, a remembered detail, a lingering look, an unexpected message, a pattern of someone finding their way back to you. The people who matter most tend to leave traces of their interest quietly and consistently, long before they find the courage to say anything directly. The signs were never hidden. They were simply quieter than most people were listening for.